The first alternative co-op of Corvallis was founded in 1970 by a group of community members, OSU students, and professors. Their idea was to offer high-quality, nutritious foods at a low price and education for people who wanted a healthier lifestyle. The co-op has grown tremendously since that time, but some things never change. It continues to be a community market with a model of environmental sustainability through purchasing and workplace practices. They strive for excellence in their products and services, offering high-quality, local, organic, and minimally packaged products. They also provide innovative education and community outreach. They now have 2 locations, one in South Corvallis at 1007 Southeast 3rd Street, and the other in North Corvallis at 2855 Northwest Grant Avenue. They are open every day from 7 a.m. to 9 p.m. The co-op has an average of 4 food demonstrations per week at each store. They also have 1 regular wine or beer tasting at each store every week. Besides wine and beer, they also have tastings of sake, mead, cider, or other creative selections. The wine tastings at the South Store are every Friday from 5 to 7 p.m. The wine and beer tastings at the North Store are every Thursday from 5 to 7 p.m. The schedule is available on their website at www.firstalt.coop. The co-op's original mission to offer education, information, and resources for healthy living continues today. It is involved in the Corvallis Independent Business Alliance, the Corvallis Chamber Coalition, the Sustainability Coalition, Allied Waste, and many, many more organizations in Corvallis. The co-op also participates in community events at Oregon State University, Good Samaritan Hospital, Hewlett-Packard, the Corvallis School District, the Boys and Girls Club, and the Yes House. While the co-op is open to everyone, ownership is a popular option for many shoppers. It costs a one-time fee of $70 to become an owner of the store. Owners have many benefits, like voting on co-op issues, voting for members of the board, getting a discount on the monthly owner sale day, and being able to work or volunteer in the store for a discount on goods. Besides the concrete benefits, being an owner of the co-op means being part of a local community. It's investing in the interest of our local economy and becoming part of an organization that is continually seeking a sustainable, cooperative alternative. The First Alternative Co-op.
Hi, I'm Emily Stymack.
And I'm Dave Williams.
We're from the First Alternative Co-op.
Today we're going to be talking about many varieties of winter squash that we carry at the co-op, all local, from local farms. And we'll also be cooking up a delicious pumpkin pie dip recipe.
Yep. Dave, why don't you start out and tell us a little bit about this?
Delicata squash. This is actually one of my favorite winter squashes. It's very simple to cook with. You can just bake it, stick it in the oven whole. You can cut it in half. You can boil it. When you bake a squash, it typically brings out the sweetness of the squash. If you boil it, it's going to dilute the flavor just a little bit, but still delicious. With this squash, the flesh is pretty soft compared to the other varieties, so you can actually eat the flesh once you cook it.
Do you want to demonstrate how easy it is to cut that?
Oh, sure. Cut it long ways here. Here's some crunching in there.
Yep. So we'll go ahead and as we're going through the squash, we'll cut a few open just so you can see what they look like inside. With the delicata, there are a lot of different uses for it. Right now, Dave's cutting it in half, and you can see the insides. The next step after cutting a squash in half is generally removing the seeds. So you'll go ahead and take a small spoon, or a medium-sized spoon, any type of spoon really, that fits in it, and you can scrape those seeds out. All seeds from squash are edible, so if you have the time, it's worthwhile to go ahead and save those and clean off the rind. And you can roast those and season them. They can be good with sea salt and olive oil and a little bit of cayenne, or you can try a sweet route with a little bit of cinnamon and maybe some sea salt. So after you remove the rind, and our little bowl is far away.
I always like a tamare on my seeds.
So there's all different things. You could try wasabi, a little bit spicier, those sorts of things. So after you get that cut up, you can put it in a baking dish. And one of my favorite things to do is to go ahead and add some cranberries. You can use fresh cranberries like these, which are grown on the Oregon coast, and a little bit of fresh rosemary, and then a little bit of olive oil, some sea salt, and if you prefer, you can try hazelnuts or any type of other nut, and you cover that and bake it for about 20 to 30 minutes at 400 degrees, and take the foil off and bake for another 10 minutes, and you have a delicious rosemary-infused squash that has the flavor of the tart cranberries, the sweetness of the squash, and then the crunchiness of the nuts. It's a delicious seasonal treat that's also low in fat. Isn't squash pretty healthy for you?
It's very nutrient dense, unlike the summer varieties that are filled with lots more water because they're picked when they're fresher or when they're younger. The winter squash is very nutrient dense because it's more mature. And they actually have lots of vitamin A, vitamin C, and
Potassium, folate, omega-3s.
lots of fiber. I mean, they're really just a powerhouse of food.
Yep, powerhouse and powerfully colorful too. The next squash we'd like to talk about today is the acorn squash. This is a really popular squash to use, and traditionally you'll find it cut in half and maybe filled with brown sugar or and butter. That's kind of the traditional way to do it. Another thing I like to do is to cut it in half, remove the seeds, and cover it with a little bit of olive oil, and bake it face down at 375 for about 30 minutes. Then turn it around and go ahead and fill it with either stuffing, maybe seasoned with fresh sage, or you can try a wild rice mixture, and then bake it until it's all just hot and tender, and it's a delicious meal.
The next squash we'd like to talk about is the spaghetti squash. This squash is really amazing for vegetarian meals, especially if you're making like a pasta dish, because you can replace the noodles. Actually, once you cook this squash and you cut it open, the inside is actually very similar to pasta noodles. So gluten-free, or if you know anyone that can't have noodles, it's a great replacement for that.
And you can bake the spaghetti squash by either puncturing the skin with a knife before you put it in the oven and baking it whole. And you would bake that at about 375 for an hour. Or if you like to cut the cooking time in half or down a little bit, you can go ahead and cut the squash in half and do the same procedure where you just oil it a little bit and cook it in your baking pan.
Sounds good.
What do we have next? The buttercup?
We have the buttercup squash here, which looks a lot like the kabocha squash, but it has this cute little cup of yumminess in there that you can see. And this squash is a very tender and sweet squash, and it's very good for pies, or you could puree it and actually add it to soups or have a nice soup with it. It's very similar to another squash that we're about to talk about. Yes.
Yeah. And so this is the amber cup. They grow in similar size to the buttercup, but it is a little bit drier, and it lends itself to either a savory meal, so you could bake that and go ahead and add a little bit of minced garlic and butter and salt, or you could go the other route and add something sweet, honey, agave nectar, cinnamon, and that sort of thing. Either way, it's going to be a delicious accompaniment to your meal.
All right. Next, we have the kabocha squash, which is a Japanese squash. And again, it's a sweet squash, and it's very similar to the buttercup in texture and flavor. Very good for soups and just for baking as well.
And one thing I learned this year, I was visiting Denison Farm, which is a local farm just north of Corvallis, is that when you're harvesting the squash, you can harvest them anytime in the fall. The farmers prefer to bring them in before they get muddy. So when we had a really great fall this year where the squash was able to ripen in the field before the rains came, so it was a really nice time for the squash to come in without being dirty. And when it first comes in from the field, it's actually stored in a warm, humid environment. And what that does is actually help firm up the skin of the squash and trap the moisture inside, which increases the length of time that it will keep on your counter. So yeah, storage.
Which the cool thing about squash is they store for a super long time. They can store anywhere up to 6 months if you keep them in the right temperature, out of the sun. The ideal temperature is 50 to 60 degrees.
Yeah.
Unlike carving pumpkins, where after Halloween, if you carve a pumpkin, you'll notice that they kind of get moldy and demise very quickly.
Yep. All right, so next we have this adorable little, oh, I just blanked out. This is the butternut squash, not to be confused with buttercup squash. And the butternut squash is definitely a very popular squash that you'll find in a lot of soups, a lot of creamy bisque type soups. And I just want to cut it up and show you guys how, well, I'm going to use this knife because I actually sharpened this knife this morning. Sorry, I didn't sharpen your knife, Dave.
That's all right.
So I was actually pretty surprised when I first cut into a butternut squash to find out just how much squash is in one of these. So let's go ahead. And you can see that I did struggle with that a little bit more than we did with the delicata. But you can actually see how much squash you're getting here. So it's not hollow. There's just a little pocket of seeds there. So one of the ways you can use the butternut squash, which I think is really fun, is make a little alternate turkey. So what you could do is first bake it until it's tender. And then after you've got it baked, you can go ahead and put it back in your pan, hollow out the inside, and mix that with some stuffing. And then you've got a basic sort of turkey shape. And then you mound the stuffing up on top of that. And then you can go ahead and get a couple baking potatoes and carve those out into little drumsticks. Put those on either side and bake it up, and you've got a beautiful alternative turkey for your vegetarian guests.
They would love it.
Absolutely.
And the butternut squash has a really delicate flavor. It's really creamy. It's kind of like a sweet potato in flavor, sweet potato and pumpkin.
It's also really good in risotto, which we were talking about earlier. Risotto is a traditional Italian dish. It's actually the traditional dish in Florence, and when I was there, I tried it. It was absolutely amazing. It's made with a particular type of rice, arborio rice, which has a high starch content. And so you cook it and you add small amounts of broth, about a half a cup every few minutes, and you stir it until the rice just kind of breaks down and it becomes this amazing, delicious pudding type dish. And you can add white wine, rosemary, I'm a big fan of, and then add some butternut squash, maybe a little bit of blue cheese. You've got a really good risotto dish.
Yum.
Yeah. So
what's that big one?
So this big buddy here, this is the Cinderella pumpkin, and it has a similar flavor to the pie pumpkin, but it's named for its shape. It's similar to the carriage that Cinderella rode to the ball in, and it also yields a lot of pumpkin. So you could cook this and then go ahead and store your pumpkin in pie-sized batches if you like, or make a pumpkin curry, maybe with a little shrimp, and then save some for pie, store it that sort of way, but be ready. Or another idea, which a friend of mine has done, which is great, is cut the bottom so it's even, so it sits flat, and hollow it out, and bake it until it's a little tender, and then you can fill it with soups and use it as a serving dish. And that is a really beautiful element at your dinner party table.
Cool.
Yeah.
The last pumpkin we're going to talk about today is the pie pumpkin. And it looks a lot like a carving pumpkin, but the difference is it's a little sweeter. And we're actually going to use this in our recipe today. We're going to utilize it and store our pumpkin dip inside of it. So I'm going to go ahead and start cutting it.
Yeah.
Across the top.
Maybe just cut it straight across. We'll see.
Ooh, you did sharpen this.
Mm-hmm. And one of the advantages to using a pumpkin like this for your serving dish is that if you do go to a potluck or that sort of event where you might be leaving before the event is over, you can go ahead and leave your dip here and not worry about it because it's not a dish, it's a pumpkin. So yeah.
Unless you really want that pumpkin back.
Yeah. So Dave's just opening it up.
Might get this big spoon over
Yeah.
here. There we go.
So next we're actually going to switch gears now that we've got our pumpkin started here and actually start working on our pumpkin pie dip.
All right.
The pumpkin pie dip is a delicious combination of cream cheese, powdered sugar, locally produced farmers market organic pumpkin, some Nancy's sour cream, and a little bit of pumpkin pie spice. So we mix all that together and you've got a delicious dip that tastes like pumpkin pie without all the baking and work that you have to do in the kitchen. So you're going to see how easy it is to make the delicious flavor of pumpkin pie in just minutes. So for starters, we're going to actually cut up a few of the things that we'll be serving with our dip today. We have an assortment of local apples and pears, and if Dave will hand me those.
Definitely.
Yep. So we've got, these are Jonah Gold apples from La Mancha, and we also have Liberty apples. These are both really great apples to grow in this area because they are resistant to a lot of the different apple fungus and just sort of different scabs and things that might grow on apples otherwise. So La Mancha Orchard does a really good job of choosing species that and types of apple trees that actually do well in our climate and are resistant to those sorts of pests. And also they do a really good job of using integrated pest management. One of the techniques they use is called mating disruption. So it's basically a simple process of adding a few little sparkly, sort of dangling, sparkly ribbons to their trees, and the moths that generally will cause the apples to be blighted are so attracted to these sparkly dangles that they forget about finding the females and they never reproduce, and thus you don't have those problems with your pests.
Wow.
So that's pretty cool. So we've got those two, and then we also have some delicious pears. And what we're going to do is actually cut those up and put them in water which has a little bit of citric acid in it. So you may have heard that you can put lemon juice and those sorts of things on apples when you don't want them to brown. And what that's doing is stopping the oxidation, which is caused by the pectin in the fruits. So if you have a lemon, that's wonderful and handy. But if you don't happen to have a lemon handy, you can go ahead and use this citric acid. It's from bulk at the co-op. It's derived from citrus plant, and it functions much in the same way as the lemon juice would, except for it's shelf-stable, and you can just use a little bit. So we're going to go ahead and put probably about a half a teaspoon in there. And then we'll cut up our fruit. And Dave's almost done with.
Yeah, it really doesn't take that long at all, especially if you have a nice metal scoop for these pumpkins. There isn't a whole lot inside of these little ones. So you might take that into consideration if you're using a pumpkin for a reservoir. Get one that's like the appropriate size. Then you have less to do.
Yep. And I'm just going to cut these into nice, little serving size dippers.
Okay. Something that's really cool is this canned pumpkin that we're using today in our recipe is actually from Corvallis. So it's a local organic pumpkin. Delicious.
Delicious.
Yeah. All right. So that's hollowed out. Now we'll move on to the dip. Okay.
Sorry.
So the dip itself is pretty simple. You just combine all of your ingredients and whip. If you have the time, you can also skip the pumpkin pie filling and just make your own, use your own pumpkin.
All right, next
Feel
we've got-
better?
Yeah, just have a little sip. All right, and I've got this delicious comise pear. It's got a lovely flavor, color to it. Pears and apples also make a really nice addition to a table setting, you know? So if you have a nice bowl, you can go ahead and just kind of put them on the table as a really nice festive, seasonal sort of element to your table setting. So we're gonna go ahead and there. We'll do one more apple and one more pear. And
All right, so I have the pumpkin in there.
one thing that I learned a little while ago about pumpkin was that the beta carotene that is in the pumpkin actually becomes more available, bioavailable to your body after it's canned. So not only is using canned pumpkin sometimes a little bit more convenient, it's also can be beneficial to your nutrition.
I'll help you out here.
Okay. Yeah, I think we can stop now. Stop with that one. So we'll just get these apples and soak them in the fruits and soak them in this little mixture here. And then we'll continue on with our dip. So what I'm doing is just trying to use a flat surface to create an easier cutting surface. So I cut that flat, and then you've got this. It's not wobbling all over. It's just nice and easy to cut. And that's also a good technique to use when you are cutting a squash, or even basically any type of item, an onion, those sorts of things. First, just shave off a little bit of the corner and create a flat surface so that when you're cutting, your food item is not shifting all around on you. And that really helps when you're cutting like the butternut squash, for example.
It's a weird shape, yeah.
Yep. Okay. So we've got a good amount of delicious fruit that we'll be dipping in our pumpkin pie dip in no time.
That will not be brown.
Okay. Are we ready
Yes.
to do this?
Definitely.
Okay.
Mm-hmm.
All right, so our next step will just be whipping together this pumpkin pie dip. I'm going to add Nancy's cream cheese to this. Nancy's is a local company out of Eugene, and they do a variety of yogurt, cream cheese, and sour cream, and we'll be using both their cream cheese and their sour cream today. They use live cultures in their food, which means that they have probiotics in them. Probiotics are live cultures that actually live in your body and help you digest by breaking down your food. So we've got that. We're going to use a whole container of Nancy's yogurt and then half of a container of the sour cream. And that will just add a little bit more tang to our dip. Okay. Spatula it up, get that cleaned off. And I got this, probably want to put that off to the side.
Okay.
Maybe this too.
Those apples look good.
And here comes the mixer.
It's a good time for me to try an apple.
Okay, when you've got those well mixed together, you can go ahead and add your powdered sugar. We use the powdered sugar because it really mixes in well with a dish like this, similar to making frosting. And we're going to do about 1.5 cups. We got the powdered sugar in bulk, and so you can buy as much or as little as you want. Generally, I don't really measure, but for the show, I'm just doing it just for you guys. So yeah, there you go, 1.5 cups. One thing I do use as a general guideline is that a container this size is usually 2 cups. So if you're doing a shopping trip and you're trying to get 1/2 cup or around that, you can kind of gauge by how full your container is, and that really helps.
Super handy.
Shopping in bulk at the Co-op is one of the best ways to eat healthy and stay on a budget. A lot of times the food will be about like 75 to half the percent the cost of a packaged grocery. So not only are you saving money, you're also saving packaging because you don't end up with all of the packaging that you would with a packaged grocery item that might have a paper wrapper, a can, or like say a bag of cereal that has a box and a plastic bag inside it.
Another good thing about our bulk department is we actually take old plastic containers from customers and we sanitize those and reuse those. So customers are able to reuse containers as well.
Okay, and we're going to mix this. Okay, and then our final ingredient is the
Pumpkin spice.
Pumpkin spice. You can add as much or as little of this as you like.
Wanna do
The
a little
recipe
more?
calls for a teaspoon. Maybe we'll just mix it in and see how it looks. Do you want to give it a little dip and try?
Definitely. Do you have a spoon?
Yeah. Another option would be to make your own pumpkin pie mix by mixing allspice, cinnamon, nutmeg, ginger powder, or you could also try adding fresh grated ginger as an option. Ginger does have a lot of medicinal benefits to your health, so when you can use it fresh, it's always a great option. It would be a little bit spicier in that case.
We should add just a little bit more.
Okay, spice it up.
Yeah.
Okay, now it looks like we're getting close. Now we've got our dip all assembled, and Dave has tested it to make sure that it's delicious. And it's got a great thick consistency, perfect for clinging to apples, pears, or ginger snaps, which we've also brought
Ooh,
today.
yeah.
And now we're going to go ahead and pour it into our cute little pumpkin vessel.
I'm thinking
And
this
it
would be
looks like
good
it's
for.
just, oh, go ahead.
I'm thinking this would be really good for just like holding soup too.
Yeah, you
Yeah.
could. Yeah, and you could incorporate it into the soup too if you baked it a little bit first,
Yeah, like a curried pumpkin soup in the pumpkin.
Yep. Sounds delicious. You could bake pretty much anything in there. Probably add a lot of cheese if you're me. But. Okay, so now we've got our beautiful pumpkin, and we can go ahead and maybe clean that off a little bit.
Sure. Okay.
All right, and we're almost ready for the party. We'll just, we've got our plate here. We could put the apples and pears on. We also have these organic ginger snaps, which go great with it. We could do that. So just take that with you to the show when you're ready to go. I think that kind of sums up our pumpkin and gourd extravaganza today. Dave, do you have anything you'd like to add?
Actually, I would really just like to try the food.
Okay, cool. Well, let's do that. Thank you for joining us today. If you'd like to find this recipe and more, you can visit our website at firstalt.coop or come into the store. We do lots of demos every week and also have wine tastings once a week at each store. So Thanks for watching, and we'll see you again soon.